All men by nature are free, independent, and have certain inherent and unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All persons may speak, write, and publish freely while being responsible not to abuse this liberty. But who is to decide when those liberties are being abused? Is censorship necessary to control those who are deemed abusers of these rights, or is it a method of stifling the free speech we are all guaranteed? Can any one person decide what is true art for the billions of people in this world, or should the decision be up to the individual? We will try to uncover the answers to these and other questions about censorship. We will discuss censorship from both sides of this timely controversy on tonight's episode of Eyes on Our World, Where to Draw the Line.
Good evening and welcome to this episode of Eyes on Our World. I'm your host, Annette Rebellato, and tonight's show is Where to Draw the Line. We have 4 guests with us with very strong opinions on the censorship issue. To my right is Mrs. Rosing and Mr. Jerkovsky, and seated to my left is Mrs. Doy and Mrs. Norling. Welcome and thank you for coming. Our first question is what are we trying to accomplish through censorship?
I'd like to address that question with a statement that I prepared for an exhibition that was held by the Committee for Artists' Rights 2 summers ago, from which I was actually censored for the only time in my life, coming as a great big shock to me. I prepared a piece about censorship in the movies. In my opinion, censorship is the attempt to control ideas, legislate morality, or arbitrate taste, usually accomplished by whatever group currently is in power. The effect sterilizes intellectual pursuits, contaminates that society with the biases of the censors. Democracy only means something when the rights of the minority are upheld equally with those of the majority. As a citizen in this democracy, I claim the right to make my own decisions what to read, to think, to view, and especially to create, whether or not my choices conflict or offend the opinion of the majority.
And what are we trying to accomplish in our separate divisions? Is in art or literature or music?
What are we trying to accomplish in the arts?
Yeah, like through censorship.
Through censorship, well, I don't think anyone in the arts is trying to accomplish anything through censorship. I think that people who are trying to prohibit the free communication of ideas are trying to keep down some of the things that are coming out through those arts, because I think they disagree with some of their points of view.
Ms. Norling.
I think that we need a stronger definition of censor or censorship, and I took the definition out of Webster's dictionary. It is an official to censor, or the word censor, an official who examines books, plays, news, reports, motion pictures, radio programs, or so on, for the purpose of suppressing parts deemed objectionable on moral, military, political, or other grounds. And then I looked up the word suppressing, and to suppress means to do away with or abolish, so to lock up essentially.
Do you feel that there
So I think we need another definition here, and that is that censorship really is almost not what we're discussing. What we're discussing is discrimination. And discrimination means to make a decision, that comes out of Webster's, in favor of or against a person or a thing. And mostly what we're discussing is not to take away and lock up, such as in Mapplethorpe, but we are discussing discrimination in not funding a certain item. If the public wishes not to fund it, it can still be funded privately, as they did with the Mapplethorpe catalog. But that is discrimination, that is not censorship.
And do you feel that the other aspects of it, as in music, the lyrics today in music, do you feel that that is valid, that they should be censoring those?
I am an artist. I am concerned mainly with art.
So you have no other views on the music topics?
No.
I think music is one of the arts. I think censorship is wrong in all cases, especially in a country like the United States, where I remember government classes, we are taught that we live in the most free country in the world. Part of our strength comes from the diversity and the difference of opinion, and if we allow anything to be censored, I think that we have a problem. I guess in the case, you're referring to the case in Florida?
Two Live Crew.
Two Live Crew, right. Yeah. I'm not familiar with the lyrics, and I probably would be very offended by the lyrics, especially as a woman. Partly my statement was about movies and censorship that affected the portrayal of women. But I think that maybe there's a difference in what's being aired on public, on public airwaves, where children or people could have free access to those lyrics. But I think the man in Florida was arrested simply for selling the album, and I think that's a different thing. I think that's censorship. Clearly,
Well, censorship is also child pornography, and are you for child pornography or
well,
against
I think in child pornography, there are other laws that are being broken, and I think you don't necessarily need to allow laws which hurt people. And child pornography is hurting those children, I think, very seriously. We don't even need to deal with the issue of censorship there. I think it's another harm.
Well, would you agree that in not funding the Mapplethorpe catalog, that was not censorship but discrimination?
No.
Why?
I would not agree with that, because people that were in favor of not funding that catalog, and I haven't seen it, and I've briefly read on it, were imposing their values of what they thought art should or should not be on the rest of us. Your allusion to child pornography is one that I want to touch on, because what we're talking about here is the First Amendment right of freedom of speech, and freedom of speech has limits. Freedom of speech does not allow you, and our Supreme Court has ruled this and said these very words, freedom of speech does not allow you to yell fire in a crowded theater.
That's right.
Freedom of speech does not allow you to give pornography to children, and clearly I would not argue that is something that we should do. So there are limits. There are always limits to this, and we're not advocating total, but I think Ms. Rosing's points about the minority and the majority are very, very important. One of the things that makes this country great is the fact that the majority rules, but the minority is protected. And freedom of speech is a wonderful thing when it is something that you agree with. It is our most difficult freedom when you have to defend something that you can't stand, be it Two Live Crew's lyrics or be it a piece of art. And I may not like a piece of art, and I may look at it and wonder, how in the world can someone pay money for this? How in the world can someone call this an artist? But yet I do not have a right to therefore take the next step, which is, because I don't like it, we should get rid of it, and we shouldn't fund it, and it shouldn't be on the wall, and we shouldn't be using tax dollars to fund it.
Are you aware of the argument by Alan Dershowitz of Harvard Law School? He said that nothing in the First Amendment prevented the government from setting up guidelines on how to spend public art dollars. The First Amendment obviously doesn't speak to government grants. The First Amendment was written at a time when the right to do art meant the right not to have the government come in and confiscate your canvas. I think, Dershowitz continued, the artistic community has become so enmeshed in governmental grants that it's become their lifeline. There is also another opinion on that from Floyd Abrams. He is a constitutional lawyer and an expert on the First Amendment, and that is also that the restrictive legislative language was constitutional.
Well, one of the great things about the law profession is that lawyers make money by interpreting law and interpreting the Constitution. Clearly, had I known that you were going to bring in quotes, I could have brought in quotes that argued with those two people. And as I say, that's one of the great things about the legal profession. The amendment that we're talking about was written in 1791, and one of the great things about the Constitution is its vagueness. And that is why we are still using a document that's over 200 years old, because it is the job of the courts to interpret the words that were written 200 years ago in today's problems and today's concerns and today's standards. And certainly the National Endowment was not around in 1791 when the First Amendment was written, and so your first gentleman is correct in that statement. But the point is that what the Constitution does for us is it sets up this framework, and then each case is judged on an individual basis, interpreting what the current 9 justices on the Supreme Court or the appellate court or whatever court you're dealing with, their job is to interpret what they think freedom of speech means.
But arts are usually not considered freedom of speech. It's considered freedom of expression.
Freedom
we
of
speak
speech
in a visual manner, and that is clearly protected as freedom of speech.
Freedom
No,
of
it's
speech
still
and freedom of
expression.
expression the courts have ruled are one and the same. They've ruled that time and time again. In numerous cases, the clothes that you wear have been determined by the courts to be part of your First Amendment freedom of speech rights. You are expressing yourself.
What the courts have not protected, though, is pornography. And both of you have mentioned the protection from harm and the need to protect the rights of the minority. And frankly, when you are using the word censorship, many people are using the word choice or good judgment when the school principal chooses to say, let's not have any swearing in the hall or no knives in the hall. He's using good judgment on making a choice of what the students should or should not do. That's not censorship. And when the First Amendment, when the judicial determined that pornography was not indeed protected, it is not a First Amendment privilege, it is because of the harm that pornography does. And that's probably why so many people are against the harm that is done by the rock music, for example. There's a great correlation between pornography and crime, a great correlation between rock music and the harm that it does. There's a great correlation between violence on television and aggressiveness in children. All these are documented studies. I do want to say, however, I don't want to sweep rock music with one broad brush, but there are cases here that determine good choices, good judgment needs to be made for protection.
And who will be doing that judgment? If I want to go see a movie that has a little bit of nudity in it, someone else wants to go see something that has a little bit of violence, I am very strongly opposed to violence. I don't even like some of the violence that a lot of the things that are shown on television are extremely offensive to me. But I don't want to say to someone else, obviously someone else gets something out of that. Maybe by watching violence, I really don't know how it could prevent it, but maybe someone enjoys it and it involves some sort of fantasy thing for them. They can live through this fantasy, they won't go out and create violence. I really don't know. I am very opposed, though, to anyone else telling me what I can read and what I can view and what I create. And I think it's hard to know where you draw the line.
Really.
I think the problem here is that
lot
we're
of people would like
discussing
to.
private funding and public funding. The NEA is public funding, and what they produce under private funding, that's different. If you're using taxpayer money, then the taxpayers have a right to say what they want. You can produce anything that you want under private funding, but then when you get to using public money, then you begin to have a problem.
Who speaks for the taxpayers?
The taxpayers.
The taxpayers themselves.
Well, I mean, how do we know what the taxpayers believe is art? And I don't understand your concern. Perhaps you can explain to me why. I don't understand why, if in fact we believe that art is a valuable part of our society,
Yes.
which I think that we could agree
Okay.
that, then the next step is we in fact believe that it is important for our government to support artists.
No, I don't believe that at all.
Okay.
I would like to
Therein lies
ask-
the.
I need to come in here and we
Okay.
need to take a short break. When we return, we will continue our discussion of censorship and ask exactly who is to judge what others are allowed to see. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Our next question will be directed towards the concept of each person deciding for themselves what he or she would like to see. Mr. Jerkowski.
Well, I think that that if we live, in fact, in a free country, which we do, and it's one of the reasons why this country is as great as it is, we all should have the choice of deciding what it is we want to see. And we were speaking a little earlier about violence on television or watching sports or whatever. And that's one of the great things that we have in a free nation, is the freedom to make those kinds of choices. No one is forcing you to watch violent television shows. No one is forcing you to go into a movie theater and put money on the table and see that. And I think we need to differentiate between adults and children here. And the issue of child pornography came up. Clearly, we have the right to put limits on what people can do as children and what they can do as adults. And you can't buy alcohol until you're 21 for a very good reason. The various magazines have rules that say you have to be 18 or 21 years of age to purchase these items, and no one is forcing you to go purchase these items or video cassettes or whatever. The other thing is, in a free marketplace, if someone is in fact producing garbage, and the American public believes it's garbage, that person, whatever the product is, will go out of business. No one will buy it. So in a free economy such as ours, I would like to suggest that you let the people themselves make that choice, and that is one of the great freedoms that we have.
Another one of the great freedoms we have is the right to protest if something is offensive and
Absolutely.
protest if something is harmful. And I can turn off the television, I can turn off the radio, and I can avoid buying the CDs, but I can't avoid having someone who is affected by those do some harm to my family or do some harm to society. And if I can encourage a higher standard, if I can encourage less garbage in, garbage out, then I'm only my own responsibility to do and take that kind of a stand. And I want to emphasize again that the First Amendment does not protect any pornography, not just child pornography. Obscenity is not protected by the Supreme Court. Miller versus California, 1973, defined it and said it was not defensible.
And should there be a judge on anything, and music and art?
Well, we're back to another problem here, though. We were discussing whether or not the art should be funded publicly.
I would like to throw a question out to you. If this came up in a discussion about the NEA that I had with a couple artists. I understand that when public money goes into something, people do get concerned because it's our tax dollars. First of all, the NEA is funded about just a little over $150 million. We fund the military at something I can't even quite, I don't know if it's 10 billion or 100 billion or 200 billion, quite an order of magnitude higher. Mm-hmm. We also fund that is open for question whether we need to do that. We also fund scientific research, medical research, a lot of things which people may question the validity of. I think that if you're going to question, you're talking about the First Amendment not protecting taxing, or the Constitution not protecting taxing to support the arts. I don't think it probably supports raising an army and raising scientific research and a lot of the things that we do that as a society we think are good for our long-run future.
Are you saying the Constitution does not support raising
I'm not sure. I shouldn't even have said. I don't.
No,
really
I really think that's probably
irrelevant. The question is that we may, if we were allowed to, when we paid our taxes, if there was a little survey, a check off, that we could say, I as a taxpayer, sure, okay, I pay 25%, but I want to decide that X number of dollars goes for the arts, X number for the military, X number, I don't like this kind of medical research because I don't understand it.
Perhaps we could do science and arms at another roundtable, but I think that whether or
there are
not
people
the
who do not like spending this amount of money on helicopters and all kinds of I believe we need an army. I personally think it's a good thing. I would question the amount of money that goes into the army, the military, and compared to the amount that we put into education, the pitiful amount that goes into the arts. Arts actually goes into the economy and turns around. The Illinois Arts Council has good statistics on the tax revenues that are generated are far in excess of what Illinois actually gives.
There's probably nobody here that doesn't think that the arts are worthwhile. It's just some of the arts that have chosen to be indecent. To many people thinking, shouldn't, if they're so objectionable, shouldn't be funded by the taxes.
They're objectionable to a majority.
Do we in fact know that they are objectionable to the majority of Americans?
Yes.
How do we know that?
There was a Newsweek commissioned a Gallup poll, and 71% of the Americans believe that art is becoming more objectionable and becoming more obscene.
How many of those people have been in a museum recently or a gallery?
I can only tell you what the poll said, and it's 71%, which is a high percentage.
But see, there again, we are entering into that area that if we take a majority vote, that the majority is going to suppress the minority. And therein is where we run into some terrible, terrible, terrible problems, because you open the door to a totalitarian type of, I'm going to tell you what to think.
Absolutely not.
And that is
that's wrong, because if you're funding with public money, even the Representative Pat Williams, he's a Montana Democrat who's the chairman of the House committee who oversees the NEA, said there may be two forces here which can't meet. One is the right of taxpayers to determine how their money is spent. The other is the necessity to protect freedom of expression, particularly in the arts. If these two forces cannot come together, then the future of the endowment is in doubt.
Well, it sounds like we're debating whether the endowment should be supported by tax dollars and not talking about censorship. I don't know that it's...
Well, you see,
don't-
the endowment is claiming censorship.
Well,
Well, it clearly is.
The artist is claiming
This would not,
censorship.
this would not be being raised if all of the artists for the NEA painted little tulips. And
That's-
and everybody
Oh, no,
said,
I
aren't
don't-
those tulips
I don't think
wonderful?
so.
That's the only reason this is being raised is because some people were offended. And I'm
yes.
sorry that they were offended. Don't go look at it.
No,
Don't
not if
turn
it's
on-
with public
well,
funds.
I-
If it's
I-
with private funds, then don't go look at it. If it's with public funds, then the people should, if the majority of people are offended by it, then they should not fund it with public funds. Then they can fund it with private funds.
It's sponsorship. There is no constitutional right to have your art sponsored.
I'd
It's
like
a
to-
privilege.
How would the public go about judging scientific research? When the issue of the cold fusion came up, how many of us have the background to go and decide if that should be funded? Does that merit? Who would we go to? Would we go to the general public, or would we go to the peers of those scientists?
But we know that
I think
artwork
the
that
same issue.
desecrates a religion, that puts a crucifixion in urine, or
Do you know
artwork
that the intent of that artist was to desecrate religion, or did he perhaps have a broader statement to make?
I know that artwork that glorifies children's relationship with a sexual union. I think,
And I don't know who you're referring to. I'm not familiar with that.
well, there's a whole list, and I really don't know that I
I've never
should
heard
list
of that.
the
So
on
I'm
air.
familiar with some nudity.
Well, let's not talk about nudity. Nudity
is
we're certainly not going to talk about against nudity here, because just,
Well, I've
There's
never
certainly-
heard of, and I do try to
but-
follow censorship
well,
issues.
we know that is it Mapplethorpe or Maplethorpe?
Mapplethorpe did not have-
He had the homosexual acts, and
Those were adults.
There was children
but there were
in it
children
also.
in it,
There were
too.
no children. Did you see the exhibition here in Chicago, either one of you?
No,
I
it was
did
listed
see
as
it.
having
I
children.
did see the exhibition, and I would have to
Yeah.
admit that some of the photographs of the adult
Yeah.
males I personally found offensive. They were small, I walked by them, I looked at them, but I walked past. The two that were, there's a little boy and a little girl, I didn't even pay attention to. It took me a long time to figure out what the media was talking about.
Well,
those are not
the-
That was maybe
sexually
adult of you to go
oriented.
by them,
Does
but
the
No.
government support other arts, music, theater? It's a question. I don't know the answer. Does the government support?
Yes, actually, the
other-
NEA supports, a
Other-
very
Theater.
small part goes to
Therefore,
painting.
if I am against musicals, which I am, I find them terrible, and I never watch them on television, should I therefore be out protesting, saying, I find these offensive?
Why not?
And the NEA, well, because I'm imposing my values on the rest of America.
well, we always do that. Every time
Everyone
we vote,
does
we
that.
impose our values on America. I think, though, that when you
Well-
can document that something is desecrating a religion, and not only, there were several paintings
I
like
don't think
that.
you understand the intention of
Well,
the
it doesn't
artist
make
at
any
all.
difference. If I don't understand it.
If you were offended, then you should perhaps walk on. If you were offended, maybe it would be good for you to write a letter to the artist or talk to the director of the museum, say, I don't understand this, I'm offended, I don't have a strong art background,
Well, I
or I
think-
don't have a contemporary background, could you please explain
There were
to me?"
several paintings, and there were
That was a photograph,
I'm sorry,
but
there were
it was
several
not
of them that
desecration.
were disrespectful of several religions, disrespectful of several values that people have about indecency, about pornography. And when those values are mocked and said, I need to have money for them, and if you don't give me money, I'm going to cry censorship. If you do that, it isn't censorship, it's a choice we've made, and it's a choice really that you don't have a right, it's a privilege, as I said, to get the money, and you could say that I regret not having the money to sustain those pieces of art, but I don't really have a right, and I can't holler censorship because I didn't get it.
Okay, I couldn't hear for a minute. So we're going to have another break, but after this message, we'll return to talk more on this timely issue. Welcome back. We'll now discuss where people's rights come in on the censorship issue. Where will people be able to say, no, that's not, going with my rights anymore? Where will we get to that point where they can say that?
Well, I think that we've partially answered that. yelling fire in a crowded theater, your right of freedom of speech is now violating the safety of others. Child pornography, you are doing harm to children clearly. And so I think that it is a question that the courts need to answer on an individual basis rather than making a sweeping type statement. We need to judge each case on its own merit and evaluate whether the rights of people are being violated by freedom of speech. So there's not an easy answer to your question.
I think that I am very strong opposed to censorship, but I think that it's more of an individual right to go in and enter a space to view things, or go to a library or bookstore or whatever. But art is a pretty broad field right now, and some of the things are being brought in the public arena, such as billboards and bus placards and that sort of thing. And I think at that point, I would be open to saying we have to have some respect for the people out there and understand that the majority of the people may not have the same point of view that we're coming from. At that point, when you're basically putting something in someone's face and they have no option to just walk away or choose to be there, then I think we have some responsibility to keep it, like contain it within a space that they may expect to see something they may disagree with. That, I think, is...
How would we then be able to judge what should be there and what shouldn't be there?
I would hope a panel of artists and with some sense of common sense, perhaps meeting with a panel from the public. I'm not sure, but I think it would involve more than just... I know a lot of artists may disagree with me, but I think when you put something in the public's face directly out there, it would be as if I had a television screen on in my wall that I could not turn off. Anything where you cannot turn it off or get away from it, a billboard, something like that, I think is...
I think something you said earlier before the program, that your particular art was not for the mass market because you didn't really want to come down to that level.
Oh, I didn't say that.
Well, that yours was more peculiar to you, in a nice way. In a nice way.
Well,
what I meant was that you did not choose to bring your art to.
I don't do my work with other people in mind.
All right.
I do my work
That's
with
exactly what I was
artwork
saying.
with the history of art in
Yeah.
mind in my own.
In answer
point
to
of
your
view.
question, though, who should judge, the law is that it's community standards, and the average community standard can determine if it's pornographic or not. So the artist who is creating his work, if he is not willing to meet those community standards, that's his freedom, his right, but then he has to accept that he cannot expect to have the community support his work with their funding. He will have to accept, just as you have accepted, a narrower market for his material.
A narrow market for when you cannot escape. Okay, when you are trying to have, and I'm bringing this up for a specific reason. There are some billboards that have been, or some bus placards or something in New York that has to do with AIDS. And it shows us a mixed-race couple kissing, and then I think there's two
Same
gay
sex.
couples. And people are finding, I think, I can see that might be offensive, that there's a question about that. It's just, we're not used to that point of view. The question there is because people are going to walk down the street or to be driving along or sitting on a bus, and they're going to see this and they can't get away. I still think it's a completely different issue of what to fund. Just it goes back to intellectual research. That's just what art really is. That's what the NEA is trying to fund, intellectual research, just like we fund the sciences and a lot of other very worthwhile projects. It's different to fund those things than to force someone to look at it.
I think perhaps maybe forcing someone to look at it is being worn like a badge of courage. I know the Boston Museum had a showing of, quote, just objectionable art that was funded by the NEA. And I hope that that's a narrow segment of the art market, but to call that a cry for more funding is, I think, probably to take away from the artistic community as a whole.
I'm not familiar with that show, but I suspect it was probably intended to educate people about the intent of that work. And I would like to bring up, there's a show that I would recommend to everyone. Anyone who is interested in censorship should go to the Art Institute in June. There's a show coming called the Degenerate Art Show, something that was censored. Well, actually, it wasn't censored. It was, well, in effect, it was. In Munich, I think in 38 or 39, roughly, the Nazis put together a show of what they considered offensive art. It was Picasso, Chagall, the people that we love and admire today. They put them together in a gallery, they slopped them on the walls, they wrote words, they had, I believe, guards with machine guns standing around. People went to see this, then they burned a lot of the work. In another great big brand new Rijksmuseum, they put the social realism that the Nazis promoted. This was government-sponsored art for the people, the masses loved it. I think that if people would go see the Degenerate Art Show, now that we have, what, about 40 or 50 years beyond us, a lot of us respect these people. If we could see what the difference in time and see what a fascist government considered degenerate, we might have a little bit more willingness to accept what people are doing today.
One thing you also might accept is that just because people have chosen to think it's not good to be sponsored, I wouldn't accept that as censorship. It's a choice of some people that they don't think their money should go for that. And
I would rather see people put their, if they're worried about funding, go after the big dollars. The NEA is really peanuts.
The NEA is peanuts, but people are upset with it because of some of the things that have been funded, and it's very much in the news. And if that's what people are objecting to at the moment, then you might as well go with it. Perhaps it will come to something else, to another funding, another time, but right now the NEA is the hot issue. Interestingly, a member of the board on the NEA said that what's happening is that they're making fun of the art. That's his own statement. It's Jacob Nussner, N-E-U-S-N-E-R, and it was just in one of the magazines, and he says, what is at stake at the moment is the good name of the arts. It is not the agency. They are making a laughing stock of the arts, and that's where the problem is at the moment with the NEA.
it concerns me that something that is as valid as free speech that we want to keep and embrace as our very own, that those who are really rationalizing some offense to the people are using rationalization to slide their way onto the free speech umbrella. George Will said, and he said this about rock music, not about art, but I think it's relevant. He said, America today is capable of terrific intolerance about smoking, against smoking, or toxic waste that threatens the trout, but it's a deeply confused society that is more concerned about protecting lungs than minds, or protecting trout than women. When you hear rock music that degrades women, or art that degrades women, or children, or religion, it doesn't seem like a bandwagon to jump on when we're trying to embrace free
I heard
speech.
George Will say something about a year ago that upset me incredibly. He was interviewed, I don't know what the topic was, but I remember this and I don't think I'll ever forget. He said it's the rampant individualism that is ruining this country. And I'd like to know, what else is this country all about? It's about individualism and freedom, and we will not be America if we don't protect that. I think we have to take responsibility for ourselves. We have to take responsibility for our own decisions, or we will not have America. I don't think that people understand it here. It's a very complicated issue. Democracy and freedom are very complicated. They are very upsetting sometimes, but this is what this country is.
Responsibility for your own decision means what you're leaving in the wake for a heritage too.
That's right. Freedom or not freedom. I am really concerned about that.
Having taken that statement by George Will out of context, what was the rest of the article about?
It was something on the radio, and I don't think that it matters if that's in context or not. Rampant individualism is ruining our country.
No, I would like to see the rest of the statement, or hear the rest of the statement.
Well, I can understand that rampant individualism is a real self-centered sort of philosophy. If we aren't concerned about our children and what violence and pornography on television and movies and the media are doing, then we are not taking responsibility. Sure, you can turn off the television. It's all right with me. I won't look at it. But you're leaving a legacy of harm to the community.
The harm is much greater if you don't have the freedom.
No, it isn't.
I have to stop us here, because that's all the time we have left for this episode. I'd like to thank my guests for coming tonight, and I'd like to thank you for watching. And remember, keep your eyes on our world.